thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for today's webinar. My name is Berit Johannesson, and I'll be your host today. And we have John as our presenter, and John will be presenting on the 5 fundamentals of successful form building. And at this point, I want to go into some of the other exciting announcements that we have in the Zerion world. The first here is that we have Zerion Academy. So you may have joined some of our other webinars, and we've mentioned this as well. We have this great new learning management system called Zerion Academy, where we have all the past webinars and upcoming webinars in there, but we also have additional courses to help you educate yourself on Zerion, as well as if you participate in any of our certification and kickstarts and onboarding training, we have all the content there. So it's a one-stop shop for all Zerion and iForm Builder learning. So it's really exciting. We will be sending out more information about it in the upcoming weeks in different email blasts, but as well as blog posts. So if you're interested in being a part of the Zerion Academy, pay special attention to those releases coming out soon. The next announcement is we do have our Form Builder recertification course. That's going to be February 14th and 15th. I accidentally typed in the 16th here as well, so sorry about that. This is a 2-day, 2-hour session each day, and it's for individuals who've already been Form Builder certified and are looking to be recertified. So the big difference with the recertification is not only do we review some of the basics of form building, but we also go into the new Form Builder interface and even do more advanced form building, so going into more page-level JavaScript. So if you already have your Form Builder certification and that certification is expiring soon, please be sure to sign up for that next session. And then going into our upcoming webinars, we have a really busy an exciting time here in February. So next week we have a webinar for the 4 useful conditional value techniques. So anybody who's looking to be a more advanced form builder or is already an advanced form builder, I think you'll really benefit from attending that webinar. Also, for the first time ever, we're going to have a 3-part series webinar. This is from February 14th through the 16th. And these are 30-minute sessions and building solutions with Zerion. So this is, if you've heard about Zerion and the different solutions that you can build with data flow automation, reporting, data visualization, these sessions are definitely for you. We're going to get under the hood and you're going to see the ins and outs of building solutions with Zerion. And the last webinar that we have in February is for the iForm Builder Essentials for project managers. So all of you who may be building new projects with iForm Builder and you're looking for best practices on managing your users and your data and your forms, then you should definitely attend that session. Now before I hand this over to John, I'm going to launch one more poll here about just to learn from you on your experience at building forms. And John, while they're responding to this, go ahead and the show is yours.
Thanks, Barrett, and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to 2017. This is our first webinar focused on training and helping you build your form building skills. I know that Tony and Ryan both did webinars earlier in January focused on kind of the state of Zerion and what we're working towards, but this webinar is going to be emphasizing form building techniques, and hopefully you'll be able to learn something from this webinar that will help you in your form building projects that you're working on currently. So for this webinar, we're going to be going over 5 different fundamentals of successful form building. So going back to the 5 different fundamentals of successful form building that I'm going to be presenting today, the first one is going to be focused on learning each form building element. So that's basically going to be looking at the toolkit of things that you have at your disposal when it comes to building your forms. The second fundamental is going to be focused on using option list key values. And again, for those of you who are new to form building, you may not be familiar with what an option list is. I will be sure to present that as a topic before I jump into that too deeply. The third fundamental will be focused on knowing when to use subforms. And again, just like with the option list, if subforms is a term that you're not familiar with, I will be sure to explain that as well. The fourth fundamental is going to emphasize how to hide elements in your form conditionally. So you're able to set up parameters where an element is either going to be shown or it's going to be hidden so that your form is as short and concise as possible. And then the final fundamental is going to be focused on making changes to a live form. So for our first fundamental, learning the different form building elements, I have this broken out into a table of form building elements. Now, there's over 35 different form building elements to choose from when you're working with iForm Builder, but they group into different categories of elements, and there's 6 of them. You're going to have your standard elements, which are going to be very similar to if you were doing data collection on a pencil and paper medium. You'll have elements that are focused on enhancing the data collection experience, and so these are going to be leveraging the fact that you're collecting data on a mobile device and using those functionalities. We also have elements focused on scanning and hardware where you're able to integrate with other pieces of hardware or using your phone's camera to scan things like barcodes or QR codes. You'll have elements for masking, which are basically going to be when you are setting up a template for the input, so it must follow a specific format. Option-based elements are my favorite type, and these are going to be elements where you're setting up a predefined list to choose from. And then finally, we do have elements focused on the appearance of the form to increase the readability and the experience of the data collector as they see and use the form in the field. So let me go into each one of these categories with a little bit more depth. We'll start with the standard elements. And for all 6 of these categories, I do have a list of each of the elements on the right-hand side. Each one of these element names, which has an underline on it, is actually a link, and that will bring you to an article on our Customer Success Center where you can learn more information and get more information about that specific element. So like I said earlier, standard elements are going to provide a similar experience to traditional pen and paper methods. Now, one of the things I like to highlight is that you actually want to think about moving away from some of these standard elements when possible. Now, if you're collecting something like a date or a time, these elements make the most sense because they are optimized for that type of collection. But the type of element I really want to highlight is the text element, the number element, because those are going to be elements that give you the widest range of inputs possible. Now, that might seem like a positive aspect because you can type in anything you want. However, if you think about it from the perspective of being able to reduce the opportunities of incorrect data entry, you actually want to restrict the type of values that a data collector can enter in. This is going to give you a higher level of data integrity. So what you really want to do is you want to look towards using elements that are going to allow for the data collector to capture the full range of potential values while cutting out anything that should not be included for that data type. So when you're choosing your elements, I have a simple checklist here on the left for you. You want to keep in mind these different considerations. You want to choose elements to simplify collection for your field inspectors, meaning if there's an element that will capture that data automatically, that's always going to be a good thing to have. You want to choose an element to reduce the opportunity for incorrect data entry. So for example, if you wanted to enter in something like an age or a numeric input, it wouldn't make sense to use the text field. You want to choose an element to be able to automate that data collection. The element that comes to mind for this one is going to be our location element, which captures your GPS coordinates. Instead of having someone manually type in a latitude and longitude, they're able to use that element to collect that data automatically. You also want to choose elements that are going to homogenize your data. And what I mean by that is you want to be able to collect data in a format where it's going to be consistent throughout all of your different records. The easiest example for this would be thinking about collecting the state of where a field inspector is. So the state can be in a lot of different formats. You could have the entire state's name spelled out. The first letter could be capitalized. You could use the abbreviation. The abbreviation could be lowercase or uppercase. All of these different variables can make the data processing later on more difficult. And so if you can find elements that are going to homogenize the formatting, that's always going to be a positive as well. Lastly, you also want to choose elements that are going to minimize unnecessary interaction with the form. And so again, going back to the idea of having a high level of data integrity and reducing the potential for your data inspectors or your field inspectors to input incorrect values, by minimizing their interaction with the form, you're actually going to elevate the quality of that data collection itself. The second set of category for elements are going to be enhancement elements. And as I said earlier, these elements are going to extend the capability of your data collection to leverage the functionalities of your mobile device. So some of these elements that I want to highlight are going to be the assign to element, and that element is going to allow you to actually send that record as an in-progress record to another user. So this is a use case that we see fairly commonly, where an inspector may fill out a part of the form, but they're not able to fill out the entire form. They have to send it to a second person for them to complete the form. The assign to element allows you to do that very easily, where you can specify who you want to send that record to after you submit the form on your device and you sync it. Instead of being submitted as a complete record, it will actually be sent to that user, so they can then download the record and continue to fill it out. Another element I want to highlight is the attachment element. And for the attachment element, all you're going to do is specify a URL. And what this element will do is when you select it, it will open up that web page that you have specified there. We commonly see this used for attaching lengthier instructions to a form or having some sort of a reference that the data collector may want to look up. So you can attach that easily within the app. The last two elements I will talk about here are going to be the image element and the drawing element. Now these two elements are fairly similar. I'll start with the image element, which is going to allow you to take pictures, or if you have the image already saved on your device, you can select it from the gallery as well. The drawing element is going to take that a step further, where it's actually going to allow you to annotate on top of that image. So if you want to make notes or highlight certain spots within the image, the drawing element will give you that added functionality. Now, option-based elements, as I said earlier, these are my favorite. And the reason I like option-based elements are because they will do the most to improve that integrity of your data collection. Basically, what an option list is a set of predefined values that the user will be able to choose from. And so you create that option list as a standalone step, and then you're going to take that option list and you'll have it attached or assigned to your form. Now, there's a variety of different ways you can display that option list. And I have a real simple decision chart down in the lower left that will help you in terms of deciding which element you want to use. The three main option-based elements are going to be your multi-select, your pick list, and then your select element. Now, from your list of options, if you want the data collector to be able to select multiple options in the option list, then your decision is very easy. You're going to use a multi-select element. This is going to allow you to choose more than a single element or more than a single option in the list. You can still only choose one if you want. You can also choose none if that's going to fit your needs. Now, if you're going to choose a single element out of the options, then you have to ask a follow-up question, which is going to be whether your option list is short or if it's a longer list. For shorter option lists, we recommend using the select element, because what will happen is it will display in line with your form. And so you'll see the options shown horizontally across your screen, and you can just choose the one that you want. This is going to be the fastest way to collect your data. For longer option lists, you're then going to use the pick list element, which is going to open up a second window where you're able to scroll through all the different options that are in your option list. It will also have a bar at the top where you can search through the list. And so for lengthier lists that exceed maybe 100 or 1,000 different options, you can use that search bar to find that option quicker. But those are going to be your three different ways to display option-based elements. There is a fourth option-based element on this list, which is your email option. And for the email element, basically what you will do is if you create an option list of approved domain names, you're then able to assign that option list to the email element. so that you're able to only choose email addresses from that domain name that you specify. Moving forward, the next type of element is going to be our masking elements. Now, masking elements are going to require the user to enter data to a specific format. And again, going back to some of the reasons we choose our elements, this is going to standardize values, which will reduce user error. Now, there's 3 different elements that we have for masking, which are your phone number, your social security number, and the zip code. Now, these are not the only data points you can collect with these masking elements, but what they do give you are templates for the different masks that you can create. Out of these 3, the social security number is going to be the most flexible, and so we normally recommend that you use that element if you want to create a custom mask that does not fit the normal format of a phone number or a zip code. When you're creating your mask, you're going to use any of the following characters below in this chart. And so if you were to use, for example, the pound sign, for that character spot, you would only be able to enter a number into it. If you use the question mark, you're only able to enter an alphabetic character. The uppercase A will allow you to enter an alphanumeric character. And then the last 2 on this list, the number 9 and the lowercase a, are going to allow you to enter a numeric or alphabetic character respectively. But what's nice about these 2 is that they are optional. So for example, if you have a set of 5 numbers that you need to enter that are always going to be there, you would use the pound symbol 5 times. If there's a second set of digits that are optional afterwards, you can then use the number 9 to represent those digits that are going to be optional. So when the data collector enters in their inputs, those first 5 will be required, the second 4 will be optional. The 5th set of elements are going to be our scanning and hardware elements. And these elements are really cool because they're going to enable data collectors to use external scanning hardware or their camera to scan codes in. So we have a list of the approved hardware and scanning technologies that we integrate with on here on the right. But what I really want to highlight here is this neat functionality of using a scanning element such as the QR code or the ManityWorks barcode scanner. And you can pair that with another functionality within iForm Builder called a smart table search, which is basically going to allow you to use a second form or a second table almost like a dictionary or as a lookup table or a reference table. What you can do is use the scanning element to scan the barcode, which will translate into some sort of a unique ID, and that unique ID can be used in the smart table search to auto-populate fields based on that one value. And so what you're going to get is, a set of different elements that are populated automatically without the data collector having to type in anything. All they would have to do is scan in one barcode or one QR code, and then those values are going to be dynamically populated. The last type of elements are going to be our appearance elements, and these are focused mostly on improving the user experience in terms of being able to see and consume the form. If you have a form that's just question after question after question, it can be really easy to not only get lost in your form, but also to skip elements sometimes, or to be confused at which part you're supposed to fill out next. So using dividers to separate sections within your form is always advisable. You're also able to use the label element, whether it's an image label or a standard label, to provide further instruction for your data collector. Sometimes when we see projects that require some sort of a consent form, we'll see the text for the consent form written out as a label. This is useful for either the data collector who may need to read the consent message, or for the person they are interviewing to simply just read it off the device themselves. And for these elements, a lot of the times they are going to be useful for collecting the data on the device, but they may not necessarily be pertinent when you are doing any data processing or reporting after the fact. And so for these types of elements, what you can do is add the reference ID element skip report within its field. And that means that anytime you're in the HTML view or you're emailing that record out, it's going to skip these elements from the report. further decluttering your data collection and your reporting. Barrett, were there any questions about any of the different data types at this point?
Not yet. I mean, there were a couple as we went through, but I answered those. One that I thought was interesting was just actually on the appearance one. And they just wanted clarification that when it talks about the appearance, this is referencing how the form looks on the device and not how it looks on the report.
Correct, yeah. So these elements are going to be all focused on the actual device's output. And so how it looks when you're on your mobile device, whether that's a phone or a tablet, how the form is rendered there is where you're going to see your dividers and your labels.
And I will add to that, if you did want to include the image label in your report, then we do have a reference ID that you'd actually use kind of the opposite of the one that John has listed here, but it's just element_report, so that you do have that a part of that.
Awesome. Sounds good.
All right, John, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you. So our second fundamental is going to be using option list key values. And I talked about option lists a little bit as I went through the different element categories, but I'll expand on that a little bit more. So as I said earlier, an option list is a predefined set of choices. You can think of each choice as being an option. And once you've defined an option list, it's then attached to option-based elements that we went over. Now, each individual option has 3 key properties that you want to keep in mind. And those are going to be your label, your key value, and your sort order. And this screenshot you see below is actually taken from the Form Builder interface. So when I was building out an option list, I built out a very simple option list with 5 different responses for a rating scale. And I took the screenshot of that, which you see down here. Now, for those of you who may have been with iForm Builder for a while, back when we had our older version of the Form Builder, you may remember working with an option list index value. And I do want to make note that for those people who are a little bit more experienced, the sort order has replaced the index value. So they effectively represent the same thing. Now that we've made it as a sort order, it gives you the added benefit of being able to rearrange your option list. So if I wanted to have excellent show at the bottom, I could switch those numbers in the sort order to have this arranged any way I want. Now going back to the fundamental, which said to focus on using the key value for an option, the reason is when you have your option list, you're able to actually access any of these 3 values. If you want to show the sort order or the index, you can do that. If you want to show the label, you can do that, and then the key value as well. So I do want to make note of that below here, that if I had this option list and I had attached it to an element called rating, if I had selected this second option, which is very good, if I wanted to access the value 1, which is the sort order, I would just use the data column name of that element. Now, for the label and the key value, I would use the command zcDisplayValue or zcDisplayKey respectively. And then after each of those commands, I have the data column name, which was separated by an underscore. So if I had zcDisplayValue rating, that would give me the label, which is very good. If I have zcDisplayKey rating, this would give me the key value, which is the number 4. Now, the reason we want to use the key value is because it won't break if we include localization in our option list or if you end up changing the sort order. So let me expand on that a little bit. One of the cool features about your option list, and actually about iForm Builder in general, is that you're able to add localization to the label text. So if your device is in a different language, you're able to accommodate for that. What that means is if you were to build out any sort of logic that involved using the label for an option list, and then you added localization on top of that, you would have to be able to account for all of the different languages that have localization enabled for them, which is going to be not feasible. What I have down here are 2 tables, and you'll see if I had localization added to this option list, you might see the labels have different text. Similarly, if I wanted to rearrange the elements, I can do that by changing the sort order, which is on the table to the right of this slide. Now, regardless if I add localization or I adjust the sort order, what I want to highlight and bring to your attention is that the key value remains the same. The key value will always be associated with that label or with that option. And even if you change the localization or you change the sort order, the key value doesn't change. For that reason, we recommend that anytime you're building out statements or smart controls that involve using an option list, you use the key value anytime possible. Barrett, were there any questions?
Oh, yeah, I jumped the gun there. Sorry about that. So there are two questions coming in. One, for those individuals who haven't logged in and haven't actually seen the Form Builder interface, you will be showing that to them in just a little bit, right?
Yes, I will.
Perfect. And then the other one is how, if I were to do this and use the ZC display value or ZC display key with a multi-select option list, how would my data appear?
It's a good question. So what I've shown you so far works under the assumption that we're using a single select option-based element, which are either going to be your pick list or your select element. If you were to use a multi-select, what would end up happening is you would have all of the different values shown as a comma-separated list. So for example, if I had chosen from this list excellent, very good, and satisfactory, it would look like this, where I would have excellent, very good, satisfactory. And this would be under the assumption I'm working with my ZC display value rating. Now, if I use ZC display key, I would then get the key values as my comma separated list. Okay. Now,
for those individuals, oops, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that in the event you end up actually using just the sort order, because you're working with a multi-select, this is going to be a little bit more confusing. What you're going to end up getting is an integer. So let's see here if I can do my math correctly. 3, 4, 5. I believe this would give you something along the lines of something like a 114. But basically that number is going to represent the fact that you had these turned on or selected and the other two turned off. And so this can be kind of confusing to work with because you're going to have to do what's called bit conversions in order to figure out which selections were made from that option list.
Great. And I was just going to add on to this. If for those individuals who are brand new and haven't built a form yet, if this is seeming a little bit overwhelming, in the documentation that we're going to be sharing with you after today's session, John is providing links to this information so you can revisit it, as well as the recording will be shared with you too. So if you start building out your forms and you want to go back and see what it was that he was talking about, you have that as a reference as well.
Yep. Any other questions at this point, Barrett?
Nope. We are good to go.
Cool. So moving forward to our third fundamental, which is knowing when to use subforms. So let me begin by explaining what subforms are. A subform is an element, just like any of the other elements we've talked about, but when you select that element, what it will do is it'll open up another form as being part of that record. What you can think of that second form or that subform as is a child form of the parent form. So my original form is the parent, and then my subform element would open up what's called a child form. Now, using this analogy, a single parent can have multiple children, meaning that they could have a subform that has multiple records, or they could have just a single child, so you would have one record. This is going to be a one-to-one relationship, whereas having many children from a single parent form is going to be a one-to-many relationship. And I'll talk about those in a little bit more depth. So why would you use subforms? I've broken this down into two main use cases, and again, there's going to be a lot of different reasons why you may want to use a subform, but these two tend to be the most common reasons from what the experiences I've had working with people. So you can use a subform as a section of a lengthy form, or you can think of it as being a shared form. What I have down here in the screenshot is I have two forms on the far left and the far right. One of them is going to be for an inspection. The one on the far right is going to be for a new employee registration. Both of these forms require you to collect information about a location, specifically a mailing address. And so what you can do is you can create a form for that information and use it as a child form in both of these parent forms. So that's a really cool way to create a scenario where you don't have to recreate this address form over and over and over again. If you make it once and you make it to a certain specification where it's generic enough, you can actually use it in multiple instances. So that's an example of using a subform as a shared form. The more simple use case is where you have a really lengthy form, say you have a form of like 100 questions, and you don't want the data collector scrolling through all of those different questions all on one screen. Like I said earlier, it can be very easy to lose your place, or it can be very easy to miss a question. So what you can do is if you want to take some of those questions out, break them as a subform, you then have a section of your form basically accessible by pressing on the subform. And so this way, the data collector screen initially may only show, 5 or 6 different sections for their data collection. Once they choose each one, it'll open up that subform, and they'll be able to access those questions as a smaller set of the total whole. The second use case we see for subform use is when you want to use subforms as a repeated set of fields. So when you have your subform, and you may have a question or a set of questions that you want to answer multiple times. By using subforms and creating a one-to-many relationship, you're able to call that subform over and over again to that single parent form and fill it out as many times as needed. If you think about a traditional paper form, where sometimes they may have that same set of questions 1 to 5 times, and you only have to fill it out 3 times, those other 2 sets are unused, and you basically just omit them when you do the data collection. The problem is you still see it on the form, and it can be a cause for confusion. When you work with subforms as a one-to-many relationship, you'll only open up that subform as many times as you need. So you're able to fill it out 1 time if necessary. You're able to fill it out 50 times if necessary. And so this is going to give you a solution that scales with your data collection needs, and you're not going to have any excess questions or elements that are shown to the data collector if it's not necessary. So down here, what I have is a subform called replacement items needed. And you'll see there's 2 arrows pointing kind of diagonal up and diagonal down. And that's because I filled out this subform twice. And it's just going to be an order form where I'm saying the item that I need to be replaced, how many of them, and then it's going to calculate a total cost for me. And so when I submit this parent record, you'll see that within that subform, there are 2 records, both for the iPad as well as the keyboards, that are going to be attached as child records. And so this is going to be your example of using subforms in a one-to-many scenario. Barrett, did any questions come up as we were talking about subforms?
Not yet. One question was, this individual knows that you're going to go into the form builder interface in just a little bit, but they're also wondering if you're going to go into the iForm interface at all.
I wasn't planning on it currently for this webinar just because of the time restrictions. But if there's an individual question that they want for me to address kind of after the webinar, they feel free to send me an email or to include it in the post-webinar survey, and I'll be sure to get back with them to answer any questions they may have.
Perfect. And in addition to that, John will be sending over what we call a form package later on. And once you have a iForm Builder account, you can actually import that into your personal iForm Builder account, and you can go in and actually complete a record to see what that looks like and to have that experience as well.
Yeah, so I'll expand on that a little bit more, Barrett. All of the screenshots I take during these webinars, one of the things I really like to do is I like to have working examples for you all so that, after listening to this webinar and seeing what I have to present, you're able to load those exact forms that I worked on and play around with them. Playing around with them can be as simple as just importing the form package and then using it on your mobile device, or you're able to also edit the different elements and try to either expand on it or try to make it more relatable to any sort of a project you may have. But I always find that to be a valuable learning experience. So our fourth fundamental is going to be focused on conditionally hiding elements. Now, from a really high level and just as a general overview, the idea here is if we have an element that we don't want to show to the data collector, it shouldn't be forced to be displayed. All right. And so out of the 10 questions, if the data collector only needs to answer 7 of them, they should only see 7. Going back to what I had said at the very beginning of this webinar, that's going to increase or improve the experience for the data collector. It's going to give you a higher level of data integrity as well. The mechanism we use for doing this are called condition values. Condition values fall under the larger umbrella of smart controls. And so smart controls are going to be any sort of statements or expressions that you write in the form builder to do things beyond the traditional and the standard data collection with each element. Condition values specifically are going to control the visibility. So again, whether the element is shown or if the element is hidden. Now, if you don't want to have any of the visibility adjusted, you can just leave your condition values alone. If they're blank, by default, the element will show. However, if you do enter in statements for the condition value, and those statements are going to have to evaluate to either a true or a false, if they evaluate false, then the element will be hidden. So down at the bottom of this slide, you'll see where it says setting the condition value to false hides it on the device. By setting the condition value specifically just to the word false, you're going to always have that element hidden. Sometimes we'll see elements that are used for calculations or to hold a placeholder value, and these are not going to want to be shown to the data collector. And so those elements, commonly, you'll see the condition value set to false so that they're always hidden. Now, some sample use cases for when you may want to use a condition value. This is going to be the most common one, and I have in quotations, if yes, skip to ... And so this intimates the setup where in a form, if you have a set of questions that is only supposed to be answered if a prior question has a certain response, otherwise it's supposed to be skipped, this is going to be a prime example of when to use condition values. We call this skip logic, where you may have a set of 100 questions, but again, the user is only going to be answering certain sets at a time, and those sets may vary depending on their answers. And so if a prior value has a certain answer, then you can use condition values to hide elements later on in the form. Another example of when you may want to use a condition value is if a number is below or above a certain threshold. We'll see this for inspection sometimes, where if the overall rating of an inspection may be below a certain threshold, there may be additional fields to fill out. This is a good opportunity to take those fields and apply a condition value to them. So if the inspection is above that threshold, those fields are just going to be hidden, so the data collector doesn't need to worry about them. Another example is a consent form, where if the user who is being interviewed does not agree to the consent form, then it doesn't make sense for them to be able to fill out the rest of the form. And so you can have a consent form at the very beginning of your form, and depending on whether the consent is a yes or a no, you can then hide elements afterwards. Another very common use case for condition values is when you have an option list, and one of the options is going to be an other. So if they choose other from, say, a pick list, you want them to be able to type in, normally a text element, what their other value is. And so you only want that other element to show up if that's what was chosen on the pick list, and you can write condition values to hide and show that appropriately as needed. Similar to the number being above and below a certain threshold, you can do the same thing with dates. So if a date is outside of an accepted range or even inside of an accepted range, you can then have other questions shown or hidden. And then the last use case I like to point out is having the potential for an admin-only subform. And so you can apply a condition value to a subform where, depending on which user is accessing the form, you could whitelist the username of certain users with your project. And if that's the person who's looking at the form, they may have access to a subform that's going to have fields or elements that only an admin or a manager would want to be able to fill out. On the right hand of this slide, I do have a couple of quick tips for using condition values. If you're brand new to form building, you may also be brand new to JavaScript, which is a programming language, and it's the language and notation we use when we're writing our smart controls. Just know that you can take multiple expressions or multiple conditions and combine them using the double ampersand to represent the word and. You can also use the double pipe or the vertical bars to represent the logical word for or. I have two examples below where if the data column I'm applying my condition value to is greater than 0 and less than 100, then that would equal to being true. If the value is something like -1, even though -1 is less than 100, it is not greater than 0, meaning the entire expression would be false. Underneath that, you'll see an example of using the or logical operator. So then only one of the two options must be true in order for the overall expression to reevaluate to being true. And lastly, with condition values, for more complex statements, more complex logic, just know that you are able to write your own custom functions, and then returning whether that function is true or false is a real simple way to keep your condition value fields in the form builder a little bit cleaner with a little bit less text in them. Now, I know that may have been a little bit confusing, Barry. Did any questions come up while I was going through condition values?
Just one quick question. Someone was wondering what DCN meant in full, because it was appearing quite multiple times in the slides. And I did want to mention to that person that it is data column name. Did you want to add anything else to that?
Sure. Yeah, so if we go back, if I have an element, right, your element is going to have a label, which is going to be the text that's shown on the device, but an element is also going to have a DCN, or a data column name. And that's going to be, if you think about a table or a spreadsheet, the column name for that element or for that data point. And so anytime you're using an element in reference to another for these expressions or these condition values, you want to refer to them by their data column name. This is similar to working with option lists, where an option list has a key value. You can think of an element's data column name being similar to an option list key value. It's not an exact match, but the concept of the label being what's shown on the device and the key value being what's stored kind of on the back end or in the database does hold up, where your key value is stored behind the scenes. Just like with your elements, your data column name is what's going to be used to create that table and to reference that element.
Great. Thank you for going into more detail with that. There is another question, and it's about the page level JavaScript, and they were just trying to figure out how they would call to a specific form element, and that's where mentioning it, the data column name, again, was really helpful. But I do want to mention that in John's next webinar, he will be going through some more advanced functions with the smart controls, and I think anyone who's looking to add more functionality and get more information about even some of the page level JavaScript will be able to include some links as well as point you in the right direction for that. Is there anything else you want to add to that, John?
Yeah, a little bit. What I will kind of give a little bit of a sneak preview. So the next webinar that I'll be doing, or the webinar I'll be doing next week, actually focuses on condition values. And so I'm going to be going into this in more depth. So if you're a little bit confused, or you feel like you want to have more information about condition values, I would definitely recommend catching that webinar when it comes up. I'm going to be going over things like combining multiple expressions, also writing page-level JavaScript functions and how to apply them in condition values as well. So I'm going to be going into things in a little more detail. I'm going to be building out some solutions as well so that you can actually see me going through the steps to get these things implemented and what it looks like on the device after they are created. So the next thing I want to go ahead and show you is the actual form builder. And before I do that, I want to kind of talk about what I'm going to be showing you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log into a test iForm Builder account that I have, and I'm going to open up the form builder. Now, what you'll see here in this screenshot is you'll see the form builder table view. And the reason I have this highlighted is because when it comes to doing things like your condition values, the table view can be a really useful tool to make changes a little bit more quickly. So let me open up my form builder. And once I'm in here, I'm going to open up this form called optionless properties. And this is also a form I'm going to be sharing with you all as a form package. And what it's really nice is in its current state, this is just an option list with a select element. And I have the smart control set to show the sort order or the index value, and then the output for the ZC display value and ZC display key here as well. So you can use this to test out your option list as you want. Now, if I want to make changes to each one of these condition values, what I would need to do is I would need to select the element, scroll down here, find the condition value, make the change, go to the next element, find my condition value, make the change. This can be a little bit slow, especially if I need to do things like copy the data column name from one element to another, which is a very common task. So in those scenarios, what I like to show people is that there's actually a second view for the form builder. And in the upper left corner here, where I'm moving my mouse around, you can access what's called the table view for your form builder. And this is going to show you all the elements in a more compact view. But most importantly, what it's going to let you do is see all of these different properties on one screen. Now, if I want to do something like take the data column names and apply them to a condition value, that doesn't require me to know the label for each one of these. So what I can do is I can hide the label, and then I can bring up my condition value. So then if I want to do something like hide all three of these fields, it's as simple as typing in false for each one of them. And for another type of a conditional value expression, if I want this field to show only if the rating is very good or excellent, I can say something like rating, which is going to be my data column name, is greater than 3. So again, using those key values or the index values. Now, this would be using the index value actually. If I wanted to use the key value, it would be a ZC display key rating. Okay. And so let me go ahead and open up the option list manager so we can take a look at this again. For my option list manager, I have my inspection ratings. And you'll see here these key values. What I wrote for my condition value were the key value for rating has to be greater than 3. That would mean that if this was selected as being 4, or this was selected as being 5. So basically, if the user chose very good or excellent, this would be true, meaning the element is shown. If they chose any of the other 3 options, this would evaluate to false, meaning the element would be hidden. And I just wanted to go ahead and show that to you all in the table view, especially for new form builders as you're exploring and looking at the different options you have. You're going to see this normal view, which is your device view. And then if you want to get a more compact view of all of the different properties, you can use this table view to do that.
And John, with that table view, can you kind of cover what those icons are under the actions?
Yes. So for each one of these elements, there's going to be this column here in the right called actions. And so this table view is not only good for editing properties within a pre-existing element, but you're also able to do things like if I wanted to add an element below, I can do this. If I wanted to duplicate an element, that's what this one is going to be for. So you'll see that this element has been duplicated. And then I can also do things like I can choose elements to cut and paste. So you can then move them around. So I just took those two elements I made, or I added, and then I duplicated, and I added them to the bottom. I basically took these three and cut and pasted them above my original select. And then, of course, we can go ahead and delete elements using the trash can as well.
And John, those same actions, can you show everyone where they can be done in the device view?
Sure. So if I'm in the device view, what you'll see is on a per element basis, the same, well, you'll see these three at least, right? So you'll see the duplicate, the delete, and then if I wanted to rearrange this, I could go ahead, cut and paste these. So now my index is at the bottom. So those three are going to be there. If I wanted to add an element to my form, you're not going to see the plus sign. Instead, what you're going to want to do is use this pull-out window here with all the different elements that are available to you. And you'll see how I have this last element selected. If I chose to, for example, include a number field, when I click on this, it's going to add that element below where my selection was. And so this is how you can quickly add a bunch of different elements to your form as needed. And then you can go ahead and make the adjustments to the properties afterwards. Were there any other questions, Barrett?
Not at the moment.
Okay. So my last fundamental is going to be making changes to live forms. And I made sure to save this for the last because this is going to be a really, really important fundamental to learn. Also, I would recommend for anyone who's new to form building to definitely keep in the back of your mind, or even print it out if you need, these next slides for reference, because this is going to be a really important topic. So first of all, let me go ahead and define what a live form is. And a live form is basically going to be a form that has collected meaningful data. So I'm past the development phase, I'm past the testing phase where I've been putting in dummy values into my form just to make sure it works properly. I'm actually collecting data that I need for my project now. Now, once you have data that's already in your table, when you edit a live form, you have to be careful because it can cause disruptions, not only to the field inspectors, but most importantly, you can actually cause the loss of data, which is going to be really bad. So when I talk about disrupting field inspectors, what I mean is if you accidentally make a mistake when you're changing a smart control, the element may not show properly, and the data collector may need to use that. Or if you accidentally delete an element, right, it's not going to be on the form. So when the data collector syncs their device and they download the new updated form, they're unable to use it. Now, when it comes to losing data, what you'll see down here is I have a list of the most common properties you're going to have when you're working with a form, and specifically with an element. For some of the properties like the label, the data column name, the dynamic value, and the condition value, you can make changes to these and you're not going to need to worry about data loss. Now, you may have a disruption in the data collection process because the form may not show properly, but that's just going to be a functionality change or a functionality disruption and not an actual disruption to your data. Now, if you do change the element type, the data size, or whether that element is supposed to be encrypted or not, those three changes specifically will incur data loss. So effectively what will happen is in your database table, some of these other changes you can think of as being an update. But changing something like the element type, the data size, or the encryption, is not able to be done as an update. So what will happen is you'll basically take that column, delete, and remake it. But when that column is deleted, any data that was in it is also going to be lost as well. And I do want to make specific note when it comes to the element type, even if you change the element to something simple, like from a select to a pick list, which are both option-based elements, that still counts as changing the element's type, and so that would cause data loss. For the bottom two properties, assigning an option list and assigning a lookup table, you'll see there's both an X mark and a check mark. That's because when you make changes to these, your data should be safe. However, when it comes to viewing old data, or when it comes to trying to access like the old option list that was assigned, or looking at old lookup information for a lookup table, you may run into inconsistencies. And so for that reason, we advise you try to be a little bit more careful about that and not make changes when necessary. But if you do happen to make a change to the option list, for example, you won't necessarily lose your data, but it may not display or be accessed properly. Now, when it comes to making changes to a live form, you want to keep these things in mind. Before you get started, you want to make a copy of that form to test and develop. So I always recommend that when you're working with something that has live data in it, you want to remove the live data aspect of the form from the equation. So you can take that form, and for those of you who are current users, this will make a little bit more sense to you, but you can create what's called a form package. So you're basically exporting the structure of the form, and you're able to import it or make a copy of it in another location. This new copy you make, that's where I would recommend you make your changes and you test it out, so that you're not going to interrupt the original form and the original data collection. The other thing to keep in mind when you're making changes to your live form is you want to thoroughly test all the different data collection scenarios. This comes into play when we start working with smart controls, where the value of one element may impact the visibility or the output of another element in your form. And so if you're going to make a change, you want to make sure you thoroughly test that change after you think you've finished it, to make sure that all the different data collection scenarios will play out successfully, and not only maybe the one or two scenarios you had thought of when the change needed to be initially made. Once you've made your changes, you finalize the changes you need to make, and you're actually going to roll them out on your live form, try to make these changes when the forms are not being in use. This is going to alleviate the problem of causing disruptions to field inspectors who are using the forms at the same time you may be in the system. And so if you can make these changes when they're not actively using the forms, you don't have to worry about them downloading a partially updated form. And then last but not least, always make sure you back up your data when you make changes to your live forms. In the event you end up making an error, even after you've gone through these first steps, you want to make sure you have a backup of that data so that you can then refer to it and restore it if you need to. Now, in terms of the steps to update an element's critical properties, so again, the element type, the data size, or toggling whether the element is encrypted or not, if you remember from the previous slide, these are the three that are going to incur data loss. There are ways to make these adjustments. You just have to follow a couple of steps to do so. And the three steps are going to be duplicate, adjust, and disable. So I try to keep this as simple as possible. The first step is going to be to duplicate the actual element. So you'll see here where I have my age field and I want to update it. The main goal is to update this to a number field. The first thing I'm going to do is duplicate this element. And I'm going to do that by clicking on the double paper icon that I did earlier when I was going through the form builder. And doing that will create a copy of that element below it. After we've made that duplicate, we're actually going to make the adjustments to that new element. So you'll see in my screenshot, after I've made the adjustment, or after I've done the duplication, then what I do is I take the bottom element, I change it to a number, and I go ahead and make the label match the original element as well. After I've done these adjustments, the third step is to go ahead and disable the original element. And let me show you how that works real quickly. So if I wanted to change something here, for example, if I wanted to change this select to a pick list, I would first duplicate the element. I would then adjust. So I will make the label match. Let's change this to a pick list. And then the final step is going to be to disable the original. So I'll take the original element and I will set it to be disabled. And you'll see how it's grayed out now. So what this means is, for the data collector who's syncing their device and using this form, they will see the exact same label as before, and they'll fill out their data collection the exact same way as before. What happens is the data prior to the change will be stored in the original column or the original element. All data that's collected after the update will now be stored in the new column or the new element. So it doesn't perfectly merge the data, but what it does allow you to do is it allows you to keep your old data and not have that deleted while you're able to collect new data, and the field inspector or the data collector's experience has been unchanged as well. So then all this means is that when you do your data processing or you do your exports, you just have to keep note that this data exists within two columns that you would need to merge together to create a full set of records for that element. Barrett, were there any questions about the process for making changes to a live form?
There was, but you're a mind reader and already answered it.
Perfect. Now I know we're running out of time a little bit, but what I want to do is go ahead and recap everything I've talked about today. So again, I went over the 5 different form building fundamentals that I want to present to you today, and they are to learn each element, to use key values when you're working with an option list, to master subforms, so you want to learn when you want to best use subforms and how to fully leverage them, be able to show and hide elements when appropriate, and then also when the need to update a form arises, make sure you make those updates properly. Now those 5 fundamentals smoothly dovetail into some recommended best practices that we always have. And if you've attended other webinars in the past, I'm sure you've seen these best practices and be presented. So I wanted to go through these real quickly. The first one is you want to define a naming convention. So if this is the onset of your project or you're brand new to iForm Builder and you have a single form, you can kind of name that form whatever you want. But you have to think forward, knowing that you're going to have multiple forms. You'll probably have multiple projects as well that all exist within that single account. And so you want to find a naming convention that's going to work well so you can keep everything organized. The second recommended best practice we have is to map out your form before building. So it's really easy, again, to just jump into the builder and start making things. But we always want to urge our users to map out their plan before they actually jump into the platform. That little bit of planning will save you a lot of time in the long run when you have a clear roadmap to the completion of the project that you want to make. Our third recommended best practice is not to forget about the data collectors. When you're building your forms and you're testing them, you're normally going to be sitting by your computer with a device next to you, but that's not going to be the environment that your data collectors are using the forms in. You want to think about how the data collectors are going to interact with your forms. Are they going to be using a phone? Are they going to be using a tablet? Are they going to have to be walking around a lot? Are they going to have different things in their hands? These considerations can impact the way your collectors interact with your form. And so thinking about that will help optimize their experience, which will then improve the quality of your data collection. Our fourth best practice is to test before going live. So to minimize the amount of updates you have to make to live forms, make sure you test those forms as extensively as you can before going live. It might seem like it adds a little bit more time to the development process, but again, you're going to be thankful that you did when you don't have to make as many changes to your form after you have people using it on a daily basis. And then the last recommended best practice here is that you're able to actually upload CSV files for your option lists. And so this is not so much a best practice while you're building forms, but what this is really going to allow you to do is to optimize the speed that you're building out your forms and getting everything completed, so you can move from development to production as quickly as possible. So instead of writing out these long option lists of 100 or 1,000 values, you can create a CSV file with each of the different options and upload that to have it populate automatically. And then finally, I do want to reassure everyone, especially those new form builders out there, that we are here for you. So I know that there can be a lot of different concepts that I went over today. And if you're feeling overwhelmed or you're feeling unsure about anything, just know that there's a lot of different support options available at your disposal. And I'll go over some of them. The first one, and probably the most important one, is going to be our Customer Success Center. The Customer Success Center has a multitude of different articles and a large knowledge base on how to do all the different functionalities that are available within iForm Builder. Dovetailing with the Customer Success Center, to the left is actually the community forums also, where we have a strong community of people who are using the platform and who like to share their experiences. They're also able to help out other users if you post in the community section. As you continue to use our different web services at Zerion, you do want to keep up to date with our release notes. We're constantly improving the software that you all are using or that you all will soon be using. And so keeping abreast of the release notes will allow you to stay up to date with all of the most recent features and enhancements and bug fixes. And then also I do want to highlight on the right side of this support wheel the Form Builder certification. Barrett had mentioned it at the very beginning of this webinar about our recertification in February. But if you are interested in becoming more proficient with Form Builder to the point where you can be Form Builder certified, we do offer certification programs for that. And then finally, the webinars. We try to offer as many of these as we can to help share our knowledge with other users. And so always keep up to date with the next webinar that's coming up, and try to tune in, participate in the webinars, ask questions, and help build your knowledge that way. So Barrett, are there any other questions before we wrap up this webinar?
Sorry, I had muted myself. No, there aren't any questions, but before we close, John, I'm just going to launch the poll. So for those of you who are still here, if you don't mind responding to this quick question about how you like to learn about form building, either it's the step-by-step articles, the guided videos, by dissecting pre-made forms, or even building a form from a starter form.
Yeah, and I do want to add on to something I said earlier with these webinars. Filling out these types of polls really help give us good insight into how you all best learn, and that's the main goal of these webinars. And so if there's a certain way that you like to have the material presented, these polls are intended to let us know that, so that we can then shape future webinars to best meet your needs.
All right, so we have a large amount of our attendees already responded, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and hand it back to you.
Awesome, thanks Barrett. So the last thing I'll say is, as a closing remark, like Barrett had mentioned earlier, within the next 48 hours, you're going to be receiving an email. Within that email, you will have access to a recording of this webinar. I will also be including in the email a PDF copy of the slides that I presented to you today. And it is not on this bullet list, but I will also include the form package with all of the different forms that I had shown within the screenshots and I had shown when I pulled up the form builder as well. And the last thing is that our next webinar is going to be on the 9th of February, and it will be focusing on the conditional value property and 4 useful ways that you can go ahead and leverage this to improve your form building experience. And Barrett, one last check to see if there are any questions that came up.
No, they didn't, but I want to give you a big thanks for today's webinar. I think it was great, and I hope everyone who attended who is brand new to building forms or have yet to build forms now feel more confident in their ability to get started. So thank you.
You're welcome. And to everybody who is listening, thank you all for giving me your attention and for tuning into this webinar. I hope you have a good rest of your day and hope to see you soon.